All right. Praising God for his love. May we never take it for granted in this chapter that we want to call where he actually began to hate them in Hosea chapter 9, which, before we get to the end, I think is almost literally going to say exactly that. End of this chapter that begins, however, saying, don't rejoice, because in the second half of verse 2, he's going to say that the way they have gone about earning their money, of course, the theme of Hosea being as a prostitute. So in getting prostitutes' wages, they've gotten their money in ill ways. So by the time he gets to verse 3, he is going to say it is eviction time, a familiar theme that we have seen, or a term that we have used from time to time for their deportation and exile. By the time he gets to verse 4, in verses 4 and 5, he is going to talk about the way that their time for feasting and sacrifice is ending or declining as the rise of the redistribution of their land is going to begin. Redistributed to their neighbors, among them Egypt, and things like the nettles and the thorns, which will take over their vacant properties. Going on in verse 7 to say that the day or the time of their punishment and recompensation has come, understanding it's because of their great iniquity and great hatred. A term that is going to come up again in verse 8, as he is going to say they have declined to the point where the prophet, it's not clear to me, has either descended likewise into the, iniquity or the lack of integrity of the time, or the environment is so bad that even the prophets cannot help them at this point. Making a specific reference point in verse 9 to the days of Gibeah, saying they have deeply corrupted themselves as in the days of Gibeah, which is going to connect to the location we talked about in terms of the place where he began to actually hate them. He's going to say, therefore, he is going to remember their iniquity and punish their sins, in contrast to those great promises he gives from time to time to remember iniquities no more. We have to remember, as we say from time to time, we will not be saved on our own terms, and his promises are not a blank check. They come with the expectation that if he is going to forgive us, we at least try to be decent people. And the trying isn't enough. We have to try in a way that's genuine. That preaching side note aside, he is going to say, in contrast, what they chose to do with his offer of mercy in verse 10 was to actually become like the detestable things they exalted and looked up to. Specifically saying they became detestable like the thing they loved. Verse 11 and 12 going on to talk about what that's going to look like, or the day of judgment is going to look like. Understanding the days of mercy he has promised before, these are days in which the mercy isn't going to so much as reach the children that they bring up, as verse 12 is going to say, even if they bring up children, I will bereave them until none is left. Verse 14 saying something similar. He will give them a miscarrying womb and dry breasts. Once again, that theme of the mercy not even descending to the children picked up again in verse 16, where it's going to say, I will put their beloved children to death, as verses 15 and 17 are going to end the chapter by talking about exactly what we titled the chapter. Verse 15 starting, every evil of theirs is in Gilgal. There I began to hate them. A kind of term that we're not used to hearing from God, but if you study the word enough, or if you just do a word search, you'll see that the term hatred doesn't just come up associated with people, but there are times when God's people push him to the point where he actually begins to hate them. As he says here, ending up the chapter by saying, my God will reject them because they have not listened to him. They shall be wanderers among the nations. Sorry for all the stumbles, but I'm just there right now. Understanding that the thing that probably caught my attention most in this, once again, extremely preachable passage is the fact that, as we mentioned before, God reached a point where he began to hate his people. And that place, Gilgal, caught my attention enough to go ahead and look it up and realize that even though I didn't literally know where Gilgal was, I did recognize some of the stories that extended from Gilgal. Going back to that passage that talks about Gibeah, Gilgal was the place where the people of Israel were first conned into shooting a pass to the 7 nations they were supposed to get rid of as they were evicting the Canaanites from the promised land. They were fooled by the Gibeonites, who put on the pretense of being familiar or sympathetic to God's cause when they really weren't. And as God had warned them, if they formed partnerships with people who weren't genuinely interested in being decent people, they were going to be more effectively persuaded to become like them than they were going to be effective at persuading them to somehow warm up to God, understanding that one of the lowest points in Israel's history were where the people of Gibeah raped and killed a woman. And the people of God had become so affectionate toward them that instead of turning them over to justice, they actually covered for them, driving the nation into a civil war. Understanding that their partnership with the people of Gibeah began at Gilgal. Likewise, Gilgal was the place where the people would eventually openly reject God in favor of a king of their choosing. Understanding that God chose Saul, the people quickly adopted him, and likewise with him a line of leaders and a set of habits that eventually lead to Hosea saying that Gilgal was the place at which God began to hate his people. Understanding this one caveat, God still left them a David through which he would bring them the Christ, who would eventually show all God's people the way to recover from the kinds of habits that attracted God's hatred in the first place.